This is Into the Greenwood, Splitting Arrows, where we take a cinematic journey through time to examine how the popular figure of Robin Hood has been portrayed on film over the last 100 years. One of the things that I enjoy about this project is considering how these various films inspire and influence one another. Sometimes the influence is obvious when you have actors like Douglas Fairbanks and Errol Flynn, who have forever molded our notions of swashbuckling action stars. While other times you find works that are, frankly, fairly sallow and derivative. And sometimes you find something that maybe you wish might have had a greater cultural impact than it did. For this episode, we explore Men of Sherwood Forest, starring Don Taylor, a film I was surprised to find myself comparing to its contemporary film, The Court Jester, more than once. Today, Rick and I are joined by special guest Jeff Wilkinson, one of the bad movie aficionados. We'll have a brief discussion of our expectations for the film, pause, and then come back for our review and in-depth discussion. So, pop your popcorn, pull on your tights, and come join us at the Greenwood Cinema. All right, welcome back for another episode of Splitting Arrows. This movie was one I did not initially think I was going to be able to find a copy of, so it wasn't on my, release schedule as much as I have a release schedule, but I was able to find a DVD of it, and so have gathered together my good friends, Richard Hopkins-Lutz and Jeff Wilkinson, to watch the movie with us. And Jeff, in addition to being our good friend, I also wanted to have you on an episode, especially with one of these kind of lesser known, more obscure Robin Hood titles, on account of one of the preferred activities that you and your wife like to do together. I referred to the two of you recently as the bad movie aficionados.
We do enjoy watching horrible movies. We actually, one of the podcasts we listen to is P.S. I Hate This Movie, where we watch the bad rom-com they're going to review and then listen to the podcast that rips it apart.
So, given that you have probably watched more bad movies than anybody I know,
I watch a lot of bad movies. But I don't do it as a religious observance like they do, so,
I'm expecting you to be able to have a lot of extra insight on that level, at least in regards to this film. Do you know offhand what you would consider to be the worst movie you've ever seen?
Oh God, we've watched so many of them. I mean, the only one recently that made me actively yell at the screen was the Superman v Batman movie.
Ooh, that was terrible.
Okay.
That's probably the worst one I've watched recently.
Coming out strong. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree. I don't have a love for that film myself. This movie that we're going to watch right now is called Men of Sherwood Forest. Came out in 1954 from Hammer Film Studios. I believe this is going to be the first of our Hammer Robin Hood movies. It was directed by Val Guest, written by Alan McKinnon, stars Don Taylor as Robin Hood, Reginald Beckwith as Friar Tuck, Eileen Moore as Lady Alice, David Kingwood as Sir Guy Belton, Douglas Wilmer as Sir Nigel Saltaire, and Harold Lang as Hubert, Ballard Berkeley as Walter, and Patrick Holt as King Richard. I have to actually scroll down a little bit more on IMDb before I even get to other members of the Merry Men. Leslie Linder as Little John, John Van Asen as Will Scarlet. So, even further down, Leonard Sachs as the Sheriff of Nottingham. So I'm not expecting we're going to have a lot of a sort of standard retelling. I'm expecting that we're going to see something a little bit different than what we've seen before. And even though the title is Men of Sherwood Forest, maybe the Merry Men won't get highlighted so much since they were pretty far down that cast list. But other than that, I have basically no expectations for this film. I'm pretty sure none of us have ever seen it before. Is that correct?
Nope. I've also not seen much in the way of Robin Hood movies where they focus on trying to rescue Richard.
Yes, going by the IMDb description, that does look like it's going to be part of the plot. I've been trying to avoid a lot of those kind of spoilers myself, ready for a surprise. I'm not too familiar with this cast. I'm not familiar with any of them in particular from anything else.
Don Taylor, he was in a few things.
He was
notably Stalag 17, which
I
do know quite well. It is a favorite movie of mine.
Yeah,
he did direct Escape from the Planet of the Apes.
Yes, he directed Escape from the Planet of the Apes, which was not a good one of that franchise.
He directed Island of Dr. Moreau.
The 77 one,
okay.
Which is an interesting one. It's interesting. It's interesting. Like I said, that would be probably the only movie I would know him from. Looking at his corpus.
Yeah, I can't say as I'm familiar with the rest of the films in his filmography. Well, I'm basically have nothing else to say about this film. Like I said, it's a pretty obscure one I didn't think I was even going to be able to find. Excited to find it and, see what our first Hammer Films Robin Hood is like.
Yeah, I mean, the Hammer Films, they have their cult following. And, if you're looking for old school, gory, slightly schlocky horror with better actors than it kind of deserves, looking at Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, most notably, then Hammer is definitely a way to go. And this is in no way a criticism of Hammer Films. I've watched and enjoyed several Hammer films, so
I'm really looking forward to our next Hammer Robin Hood film, which stars Richard Green as Robin Hood and the aforementioned Peter Cushing as the Sheriff of Nottingham. So that will be an interesting one. That's The Sword of Sherwood Forest that was made in 1960. But since we're going chronologically, we've got The Men of Sherwood Forest from 1954 to get through first.
Yeah. I hope this is at least watchable and doesn't contain some of the problematic stuff.
As an early 50s movie, I fully expected to have cheesy music and lots of problematic stuff.
It depends on the early 50s movie. It really does. Like the Disney's Robin Hood did not have nearly as many problematic things as, some other early 1950s or late 40s Robin Hood movies that we watched. And was
the general track record for films from the 50s is pretty questionable.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Willing to give it a go. All right. I think that will do us. We're going to take a break from our recording, watch the movie. When we come back, we'll have our discussion of the film, and it will no longer be spoiler free.
Spoilers beware.
I should probably come off of mute before we record the rest of the podcast.
Yes.
So I really enjoyed that movie.
That was way better than I really expected it to be.
I genuinely enjoyed that. It was
very much not the oft repeated story of Robin Hood. It wasn't your normal, just him fighting Prince John. It was him trying to rescue, make sure the king didn't get murdered when he landed.
It was
right. It had that similarity in that it had part of the plot having to do with Richard's return to England and Prince John's, attempt to overthrow him. So part was very familiar, but it didn't feel like it was doing like, this is the story of Robin Hood. They even said at one point that he has been Robin Hood for 10 years. So it wasn't like we're going to give you the origin story or anything.
And the one character, Lady Alice, actually mentions they talk about the ballads of Robin Hood. That there's been ballads written.
Yeah, so this is a Robin Hood who's been around for a while, and it is a significant episode, and he gets pardoned by Richard at the end, which feels very familiar to other Robin Hood movies. But he's not given lands or estate.
Or the girl.
Yeah, there's only two female characters in the movie. One who is the young noble lady, Lady Alice, who seems like she's going to be the stand-in for Lady Marian, but she isn't really. She's just kind of her own different female noble lady character. There isn't a Maid Marian in this.
She's not the one who's fallen in love with Robin Hood and riding off with him in the sunset in the end, like Maid Marian always is. She's betrothed to another knight.
You think that she's going to, they even really set it up. They play up a lot of these tropes where she wants to hear about Robin Hood, and she has heard that he's handsome and dashing and wants to hear this troubadour play his ballads. And then when Robin and Friar Tuck are in jail, she does her best to rescue them. And then she's riding out of the palace to warn him and his men. She's doing the same things that we saw other female characters do in these movies, but in those cases they always did it at least in part because they were in love with Robin Hood by that point, or in some of the cases Robin Hood's child in some of those films. In this case, it generally just seemed like, oh, I found out these other guys are traitors to the king and Robin's not, so therefore I'm helping him. It all was just kind of more genuine.
It was it had a different tone, a much more roguish Robin Hood.
They didn't focus on he's an amazing archer. He's a good archer, but so's most of his trope. They don't have the archery contest like we see so many times in every other Robin Hood movie or story. It's just he's good with a bow because he's a good bowman.
But he's also probably one of the more athletic Robin Hoods we see.
Yes.
He was jumping and tumbling and fighting and had the pimp slap of doom. He could just pow,
hoisting himself up over things, swinging from things. I wrote down that this was the most displays of upper body strength since Douglas Fairbanks.
Yes, right. But you know what? If you're drawing a bow all day, you're developing that upper body strength. No, he was very rough and tumble.
And he was,
that's the phrase that stuck with me.
Rough and tumble, also older, more mature. You got this idea of yes, he has been Robin for a long time, and he looked it and acted like it. He was not a young man, but clearly still a man in his prime and very capable. It is very believable as a Robin Hood who could be very jocular, very funny one moment, but also be very, very serious the next. I kind of bought him as both a trickster and a serious fighter.
Very much on the trickster. And he goes into disguise more than once in this movie. And he's also not above just intimidating the heck out of somebody. And I said earlier, he feels more working class. He doesn't feel like somebody who's noble birth, slumming it in the forest. No, he feels like
it's just what he does.
It's just what he does and has done for 10 years.
There's no hint that this is a Robin Hood who had been a nobleman that lost his land. They don't give us his origin story, but if he had been a nobleman, it would have come up at some point, especially with King Richard at the end. So it's pretty clear that was not the case with this character, and you felt it. He seemed like as you kind of say, kind of working class hero.
And it's like Richard doesn't know who this guy is. He's never even heard of him. The only vouchsafe he has for them is that one of his companions, when he gets back, is like, "Oh no, I met him at Ellen Adale's wedding."
That reference to earlier adventures was something that I really liked. Something that I think the movies in general have done a disservice to in regards to the story of Robin Hood. One of the points that a guest on an earlier episode of the podcast brought up was that one of the reasons why he suspects that the Robin Hood outlaw tales caught on with more popularity than other medieval outlaw tales was because of their serialized nature. It
Mhm.
wasn't just like a single, this is the story of Robin Hood that is being told, but he was sort of a character that was appearing in multiple ballads. There were, as William Langland wrote, rhymes of Robin Hood. There were multiple different tales. And the movies have kind of created this impression that there's like a single story of Robin Hood that can be told, where that hadn't previously been the case. And this movie is one of, not the only one, but one of the few that kind of has sort of that feel to it, that this is, an episodic moment in the continuing adventures of this roguish outlaw.
Yeah, and that was actually a nice thing, because I mean, so many of the Robin Hood movies we have in modern day, or just in the last 30 years, it's always, here's how Robin Hood came to be an outlaw. Now he fights Prince John. Now he's defeated Prince John, and King Richard just reappears somehow, and everything's back to normal. It's like, okay, this took maybe a year.
Yeah.
Where this is like, yeah, he's been an outlaw for 10 years now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that, what you're saying is goes way further back than that, because even the Douglas Fairbanks one, that's the essential story.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a movie that turns 100 this year.
Yeah. So
Good
it's been, that's pretty much the case of anything where it's not an old Robin or a son of or child of Robin Hood. What you said is the formula, is exactly the formula of the movie.
And even in some of those child of Robin Hood movies, like one of my complaints about The Bandit of Sherwood Forest that was about Robin Hood's son was that it was telling the exact same story, just with Robin Hood's child.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, it's not about saving King Richard, it's about saving Henry III, but it was the exact
The
same
same
formula,
story.
the same story beats.
Yeah.
But no, but then the movie was also genuinely fun. It was a very short movie, only an hour and 17 minutes. And it was
moved.
brisk. Yeah.
But it
was-
never was too fast.
Yeah.
It never felt
It
rushed.
was never rushed, no.
Yeah, it felt like they told the story they were trying to tell, and they didn't labor on anything. I would have kind of loved if this had been like kind of one of a series of movies. If this had been like,
Yeah.
if these had been a set of kind of those masterpiece theater, short movie length kind of dramas, and they had done like a series of these or various adventures of Robin Hood, this would have fit in great in that kind of scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed Don Taylor as Robin Hood. Like, I really liked his performance.
Me too. It was very different, but very solid. He felt very natural in the role. He was charismatic while also active.
Yeah, and he looked like Oliver Queen.
He did a bit. You're
like,
right.
Like in
Oh
my
my
head
God.
canon, my head canon for this is Oliver Queen is persuaded to take a vacation, and this is the like LARP scenario that he rigs for himself.
Yeah.
Oliver Queen, for listeners, is the alter ego of the superhero Green Arrow, and not so much looking like the Stephen Amell Green Arrow from the show Arrow, but more the Oliver Queen from the comic books, especially the Mike Grell era from the late 80s and early 90s. Yeah, that Oliver Queen looked a lot like Don Taylor as Robin Hood.
Yeah, more than he looked like Errol Flynn's.
Yeah, I would agree. So it was a good. I also liked that as a Robin Hood, he relied on trickery more than anything else. Like he didn't hesitate to intimidate people. He didn't hesitate to jump into combat, but his go-to move was always trickery.
Mhm.
Yeah, trickery, deception, sneaking around. You know, like he like in at one point in the movie, you know, he's in the castle as a guest, and he, you know, knocks the guard out, and he says, you know, it's like, you may only be out for an hour, but a man could do a lot in an hour, and then proceeds to run around and spy on things. At one point, I do feel he makes a bad decision, but you know, it's, you know, because he should have just that one guy had taken the note. But he, you know, he's sneaking around the castle, and he's like spying, and he's you know, doing all these things.
Yeah, and he didn't kill that guy. We do see him kill some people towards the climax of the film, but it is something he actually seems genuinely hesitant to do, like willing to kill, but it is not a go-to move.
Yeah.
No. And he's smart. That's one thing actually I want to point out, is that actually the characters in this movie, at least the main bad guys and good guys, come off as fairly intelligent people. They're let down by their peons, by the guards. But like the villains have a solid plan. Like, it makes sense.
The villains trick the heroes multiple times in this movie.
Yep.
And
it's only thanks to the underlings being terrible that the heroes are able to get the upper hand.
But they also don't ever trick them because the heroes are dumb either. I don't want to give that impression either. The characters, the main characters are heroes, and primary villains all come across as clever and competent. And that was really refreshing and different to see, not just in correlation to Robin Hood movies, but pretty much any action movie.
Oh yeah. Well, and especially in the Robin Hood genre, so much of the trope is the sheriff is incompetent.
Quite often, either the sheriff is incompetent or Guy of Gisborne is incompetent.
So our villains in this movie, like, we do see the Sheriff of Nottingham briefly. He does come and try to arrest Robin Hood at one point and gets tricked, because this is a Robin that is relying on trickery. And that was another clever moment on the part of the heroes.
Hides under the horse armor.
Right. But also, like, did the thing where they made it sound like they were going to hide up in the loft, such that the armorer genuinely thought that that's what they were doing, and that's what he tells the sheriff.
The sheriff was smart. He's like, "Oh, if you heard that they were going to leave the loft, they must be in the cellar." So he goes and checks the cellar. Of course, they're not in the cellar either.
Yeah, exactly. Even the sheriff was like seeing through a ruse. He still got tricked in the end, but it wasn't because he was being portrayed as buffoonish or incompetent. It was well done.
He's just generally outsmarted.
But then our primary villains are basically a collection of knights who are not otherwise figures in Robin Hood lore, a collection of knights who are loyal to Prince John and attempting to enact a plot to assassinate King Richard when he first returns to England to help John claim the throne. It's hard to assess them in relation to other portrayals in that they're unique characters, but they fill the role of the Sheriff of Nottingham or Sir Guy of Gisborne. And they do it well.
Yeah, you don't see Prince John in this movie. He's not in this movie. You see the Sheriff of Nottingham very briefly. He's actually only really in one part of the movie, and then the rest of the movie, your primary antagonist is an invented character named Sir Guy Belton, who might be standing in for Guy of Gisborne, but there's no mention of the Guy of Gisborne.
Yeah, it really just he functions as evil knight loyal to Prince John.
Yeah, and he has a couple of primary henchmen, in particular a guy named Hubert, who's again also very competent. He's pretty smart.
Manages to trick Robin Hood himself.
Manages to trick Robin Hood in a very believable way. And at no point did I feel that there was anything that didn't make sense or anything that came out of nowhere. At no point did any of the primary characters feel like they were dumb. They were making smart decisions. Some of the guards we aren't going to go into, but because that's kind of one of the plot points of the movie. No, it was and it was fun. It was just fun. Like the action scenes were good. Some of the fight choreography was a little rough, but that happens. It's
I thought like there was only one really big kind of sword fight scene in a castle hall, and I thought that was pretty good. It was very dynamic and action filled. I thought the choreography for that one worked. A couple other times it was pretty clunky though.
Yeah, well, you could tell people holding the sword to be hit, in a few places, and it's fine. This is a Hammer film, so it probably wasn't incredibly high budget. Hammer was kind of a movie mill, but I was not expecting a solidly good script, like a solid plot that wasn't just a rehash of any previous plot that had its own points, had its own moments. You have this whole thing of like Robin sneaking into the castle as a troubadour, which isn't something that we've really seen happen.
And he really plays the troubadour for a while. Kind of shades of the court jester, the Danny Kaye movie, in some degree.
A little bit, but here's the thing that I also really love is that he shows up, he like gives a code song, and then
again court jester
says that he's like, this person, and they don't believe him. They don't trust him. It's like, oh, he says he works for this guy we know, but we don't know him.
We can't afford to just tell them we don't believe him, but let's hold our cards.
Yeah. So I really liked that. Again, competent villains.
It's a poorly titled film. Men of Sherwood Forest is not an exciting film, or exciting title for a film, and doesn't feel very accurate, because while we do get to spend a lot of time with Robin Hood, Friar Tuck is the only other member of the Merry Men who we really also spend time with. You get a little bit from some of the others here and there. It's a perfectly fine portrayal of Little John and Will Scarlet and others, but they barely get screen time, only a couple of lines between them all.
And usually it's just as part of the larger band when they have to go out and rescue the king.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you could have titled it, "Would You Be Interested in Gambling?"
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah, we should talk about Friar Tuck, who I'm going to say is my pick for Merriest Man.
Oh God, yeah.
Way more than in any other movie we've seen.
And not just because he was the only Merry Man who really got any screen time, but he was pretty good. He was great.
This gives Friar Tuck the hat trick, by the way.
Yeah.
Because we gave the Merriest Man Award to Friar Tuck for Rogues of Sherwood Forest. We gave it to him for the story of Robin Hood. And now for this one, 3 Splitting Arrow episodes in a row, the Merriest Man Award goes to Friar Tuck.
But can you argue with it in this one?
Not at all. I mean, he takes I guess the thing was intended as a roulette wheel all the time. Mm-hmm. They steal the Zodiac roulette wheel from the actual priests who came back from the thing, and he takes it into the castle. He's like, "Well, time to distract the guys. Who wants to gamble?" Plays roulette with them and proceeds to trick them into losing all their money while Robin Hood does all
gambling and is very good at them.
And then his way of getting away from the soldiers is to play strip poker with them.
Right?
Yes, he teaches a room of guards poker. They don't have money to play with. So Friar Tuck plays.
They had money to play
poker.
with, but Friar Tuck didn't have money to play with. So he's like, "Don't worry, we just play for clothes."
No, they said like, as soldiers, we don't have any money.
I thought it was just
we're not paid well enough.
Yeah. No, and then proceeds to play strip poker with them. And then when when the bell sounds and everything, and then they're like, "Oh crap, we need to put our uniforms on." Literally just walks out of the freaking room,
out the door while everybody's trying to go through the giant pile of clothes that they bet.
Striding confidently away, making fun of Robin Hood at various points.
Oh yeah.
Singing songs, being jolly, willing to throw down in a fight. It was an excellent Friar Tuck.
I will give a runner-up to Lady Alice, who was key to the plot, and did not turn into a Marion stand-in.
Right.
There was definitely a little bit of romantic tones there, but she's betrothed to this other guy, and he's a decent guy. He came back with Richard, and
she seems quite happy with him at the end.
Yeah, there's no wistful look at Robin.
No, she's like, "No, my man's back. I'm happy with him."
My man's.
Yeah, I think she gets an honorable mention. She was quick to leap into action multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
Did some dressing in disguise herself. Another honorable mention to her handmaiden, who just totally yoinked this one priest out of the hallway and stripped him naked so that Lady Alice could wear his clothing.
Yep.
This movie had some genuine laugh out loud moments, and that was one of them, because the priest just he talks to Lady Alice, and she's like, "Are you sure you can't take him this rasp?"
Like, I'm neutral. I can't do that. I'm just a good
turns
priest.
around,
down the hall. Maid grabs him. Yoink.
Yoink.
Yeah, the middle-aged lady just grabs him. You see her hand reach out after Lady Alice's attempts at diplomacy and persuasion failed. Yeah, no, it was good.
Yeah. And it was not the only funny moment. There were multiple other really funny
We never do get to learn about the gay hermit.
or whatever. Yeah, there's the hermit verse. Damn it.
Yeah, there's a great moment where Robin and Friar Tuck are trying to escape from a jail cell. They've been smuggled in a rasp by Lady Alice when she was wearing the priest's clothes. And to cover the sound of their sawing, they're singing this loud song about the Mary, this kind of bawdy song about the Mary Forrester. And the handmaiden mentions, like, oh, I hope you didn't hear the verse about the hermit.
Yeah.
And just as you hear the men about to start singing the verse about the hermit, they've finished sawing their way through their chains and don't go through with it all the way. So we as the audience are left having to imagine what the extremely bawdy verse about the hermit might be.
Yes. Yeah, it's now I want to know.
Which was also clever on their part, I thought.
Yes. So compared to my expectations, I came into this with no expectations and they were completely blown away. Like totally.
Your lack of expectations are blown away. I was expecting something worse too.
I was definitely expecting something worse.
The style and such was very much what I expected in general of that era of movie, especially pertaining to that sort of theme. But yeah, overall, it's a much better movie than I expected.
In some ways, actually, I will say it actually felt a little bit different from a lot of early 50s movies, because in films made of that era, a lot of times, especially in this kind of like medieval epic ballad, whatever, you end up with a lot more reactions with music cues. You know, like Robin is seized and you flash to the female character, she's like, and there's and the strings rise. None of that. There was none of that. And it's part of what made this movie feel so tight.
Yeah.
But not rushed. You know, it actually, you know, it had the story it wanted to say, that it wanted to tell. It told that story and it didn't waste time. A lot of that, it actually makes it feel like a movie from a later time period to me. Now, the score definitely feels like an early 50s score. The costumes feel like early 50s medieval costumes. The sets were really quite nice.
They were.
I thought the blacksmith shop and Robin's cave, those were really nice sets. There was a lot of set dressing, a lot of pieces.
Yeah. There were really nice details on all of the costumes and set pieces. And they were in genuine forests. Like,
yes.
No, yeah.
It looked good. They looked like they were in forests. The sets were well appointed. The costumes were well done and had nice details to them.
Well, it looks like it was shot in England. So they had actual forests as opposed to California.
Yeah.
Well,
one thing actually I really did.
Hammer is an English production company, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I explain why then.
But you know, the title card says Bray Studios. But I actually, one of the things I wanted to say was this is one of the few movies you don't have like Robin in this, in some cases, rhinestoned tunic. His shirt, you know, his one green shirt that he has, that he wears for like the first third of the movie, is fairly rough. It looks like a woodsman's shirt. Got this kind of very open collar with a spiraled lace, but it's not fancy. It's got like a shoulder patch on one arm. And everything. Yeah, it was, you know, like it was far more believable than and forgive my blasphemy. It was far more believable than what Errol Flynn wore.
And Errol Flynn, you know, is sort of the epitome of the nobleman who becomes the outlaw, whereas this didn't feel like the nobleman. This was much closer to the Richard Todd. You know, this is the yeoman who has become the outlaw, and therefore his outfit looks much more rough. And he had a good kind of, this looks like a proper outlaw kind of outfit. But then he also had a very swashbuckling kind of loose flowing shirt for when he was the troubadour running around the castle, which again reminded me a lot of Court Jester.
Yes.
When Danny Kaye has got his kind of white floofy troubadour shirt and is running around being a swashbuckler there. Yeah. Very similar look.
The other thing I wanted to mention is something that we saw in a different movie. It's fun that you keep mentioning the Court Jester, because the Court Jester actually came out the year after this.
It did.
It was 55.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you have to wonder if there's any influence in which way it goes on that one. But I was going to say one thing that they put in there that was in one other movie that we saw was signs of signaling systems by the bandits to know when people are coming towards the camp. You know, we had the whistling arrows in the one movie, but in this one it's more like horn blasts
or bird calls.
And again, it's kind of one of those little details that's kind of nice to see that somebody put some thought into that.
Yeah, there was like a number of good little details.
Or like Little John waiting outside the castle for Robin's signal and having and himself having a little signal lamp.
Yeah, or it might have been a mirror. It was
like a mirror and a candle. A fire.
Yeah. One other note I wanted to make when we're talking about the time period and expectations. A lot of the other movies of this time period coming from the late 40s and early 50s, you could really see this sort of backlash to the rise of communism. And one of the ways I've identified that is seeing how unwilling these movies have been to be critical of Christianity and of the church as an institution. You know, that's one of the ways that the US in particular, but probably also to a degree Britain, I don't know a lot about this, were reacting to the specifically atheistic USSR is to put under God in the Pledge of Allegiance and on our currency, and, you know, emphasize that we are devout. And you see this in a lot of the other Robin Hood movies from the time period, where Robin Hood does not seem to rob, you know, members of the clergy, where we are presented with, in multiple movies, the Archbishop of Canterbury as being an unquestionably good and righteous figure. And in this movie, that is not the case. Robin specifically calls out how there is corruption in the church.
Which is accurate, because I mean the church was on the same tier as nobility at that time, basically.
It's not belabored, it's not significant to the plot, but and he, you know, is even handed about it. He says there are righteous, you know, and well-meaning churchmen, but it is corrupt, and calls out a particular abbey that is exploiting, you know, the people that live in its vicinity, and is feeling no qualms about stealing, you know, the gold that is intended to go to the abbey and not to the people. You know, it was something unexpected from the time period.
Well, and this is where I think definitely some of this is the difference between American movies and British movies.
Yep.
Which is something you'll always see. In British television feels different than American television. British movies feel different. And Britain doesn't always acknowledge some of the not so great parts of their history, but they'll cop to it sometimes. They'll be like, yeah, no, the Anglican Church was kind of terrible at that point, you know, or the Catholic Church in England was the Catholic Church in England was kind of terrible at that point. And you know, they'll have no problem bashing the Catholic Church of the 12th century. I mean, there's a lot to bash.
Yeah, and it comes through in this movie. It really does. Also, we were a little bit worried going in relating to how 50s the film was going to be, and I think we were kind of beating around the bush a little bit, but I think we were mostly talking about how misogynistic it was likely to be, possibly racist too. And while this was certainly not a feminist movie by any stretch, technically passes the Bechdel test, but like when you only have the two female characters, it doesn't really mean much. But it didn't have the kind of gross misogyny and toxic relationships that we were worried we might see, and that you do see in a lot of other films from the time period.
Yeah, like there was definitely a little bit of infatuation on Alice's part towards Robin Hood, but she's never treated poorly by anybody. She's never called a foolish girl. She's never dismissed angrily or anything like that.
Well, and both her and her handmaid are thoroughly competent.
Yes, they are painted as competent people who want to forward good in the world. You know, like even when they don't have all of the information, it's just because they don't have all of the information, not because they're dumb.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it exceeded expectations in terms of our fears of how it might come across as a movie of its time.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
So let's go ahead and run down some of the lists of the questions. We already covered Merriest Man. There was a clear winner here again, as there often has been. But this one more than most, because you did spend very little time. But it did help Robin Hood shine. He came across as a heroic figure, even if it did end up being at a bit of the expense of the supporting cast. Okay, so greatest feat of archery in the film. There wasn't a lot of archery in the film, as Jeff mentioned, no archery contest, but there were a couple of impressive shots.
I mean, there was the shot out the window to deliver the message to John.
By candlelight at dark.
By candlelight at dark and not shoot John.
Yeah, I did like the shot at the end where he shoots. Sir Guy is up in a tree about ready to jump on King Richard and knife him like a jerk. And this is not at night or anything, but it's in a dark wood. And Robin from horseback friggin' nails the guy.
Yeah, at full gallop.
At full gallop.
Those were really the two that jumped out at me. Shooting the message arrow to Little John by candlelight and shooting the villain from horseback. Both excellent feats of archery done by Robin Hood.
Yeah, I am going to also mention the shooting of the two guards who were assaulting Lady Alice. Because that was, I don't know if that was meant to be at night or if it was just the quality of the film, but it felt like it was at night.
I took it to be kind of twilight.
Yeah, kind of twilight. And he hits both of them, moving targets, who are struggling with somebody he doesn't want to hit. And that's and from a castle window that is easily 50 yards away.
Yeah.
And that's
more,
impressive.
yeah.
Or more. And that's impressive too. So there is some honestly, there's more impressive archery in this than there is in some of these other Robin Hood movies that we've seen, even though there's not much archery.
Yeah, they never have to belabor the notion that Robin Hood is an expert archer. This is the Robin Hood who already exists as a legendary figure, just being the excellent archer that he is.
And I'll go back to that's actually one of the things I actually really appreciate about this movie is they didn't do his origin. It's just like, yeah, it's Robin Hood. Everyone knows who Robin Hood is. Carrying on.
Yeah, it didn't fall into the Spider-Man movie trap. Right. They have to retell his origin every I don't need his origin story.
Just because you change the actor doesn't mean I need to know where Spider-Man came from again.
Yeah, that is one thing I did appreciate, that we haven't seen Tom Holland go through the I'm just like, come on, I know who friggin' Spider-Man is.
How about best example of swashbuckling action?
When I think of swashbuckling, it's got to be swinging from chandeliers.
Which he literally does.
He does very well as a way to be sneaky.
Yes, as a sneaking swinging from a chandelier, and lands on the table utterly silently. And yes, that
doesn't
was
disturb any of the glasses, none of the food that's left there as he's trying to get past the sleeping guards on the floor of the Great Hall. I really like that.
That may be the most impressive one. I don't know if it's as far as I don't know, that the fight that ensues afterwards is full of a lot of really nice swashbuckling.
He does swing on the chandelier again.
It's I have to say it's actually a little tough to pick the best example of swashbuckling because there was a surprising amount of it in this, mostly right in the middle of the movie, but a surprising amount of it. But yeah, no, I like the stealthy chandelier swinging myself. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. It had a very tense and kind of video gamey sort of feel as he was sneaking around the castle, avoiding being seen, avoiding waking people up. It was pretty good. And then during the kind of big castle fight scene, there was a lot of jumping over tables and all.
Yeah, how many pull-ups is that guy doing a day downstairs? Holy crap. Also, that was one thing is at no point did I see any obvious stuntman swap outs.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that.
There were a few points where I was pretty sure there was a stuntman, but it was, like you said, it wasn't obvious. It wasn't ooh, this is blatantly a stuntman.
Yeah. If they did it, they hit it well.
Yeah, there was one scene where he is scaling the outside of a castle wall, And the film is cut in such a way, as you can tell, that he is not actually scaling the wall, in that they kind of cut it off below the legs.
Yeah.
So the actor could obviously be standing on something. So that wasn't impressive visually, but it was still a neat concept, and felt fitting with this Robin Hood who we see hoisting himself up rafters and hoisting himself up bell poles, various other points. The idea that this is a Robin Hood who had the kind of dexterity and strength to do something like scale the outside of a castle wall felt fitting with what we had seen.
Yeah, I mean, they only have one stunt person listed in this, and it's the fight director.
Unfortunately, stunt people were not always well credited in
true.
movies.
Yeah.
How about wittiest bit of banter?
There was a lot of really nice witty banter in this, especially out of Friar Tuck, but
Yeah.
also out of Robin. Like they had some back and forth that were just.
I mean, I appreciated the bit of back and forth between both of them when they were Robin as the troubadour, Friar Tuck as the abbot, and they're both insulting each other's actual personas.
Yes, I liked that bit. That's the one that actually kind of sticks out for me. Although anytime Friar Tuck is about to start any kind of gambling, like he's sitting in the guard room and he's a prisoner and he's asked to be kind of isolated. Some of this is to communicate with Robin and everything. And he pulls out this pouch. He's like, "Hey, what have you got there?" And he's like, "Oh, these?" And he acts so innocent. He was like, "Oh, these are our
displays of all the forms of chivalry.
All the forms of chivalry. See, he lays out
like a deck of cards.
It's a deck of cards. It's like, here's a knight. Look, it's about chivalry.
There's the sigil of the Lord I used to serve under.
He's like, "Let me show you what I do with these. It's this little game."
And then all the guards are naked.
And then all the guards. No. There's some scenes where they're half dressed. So for the fan service.
Yeah, the scene where Robin has infiltrated this castle disguised as a troubadour, and he hears that this abbot is arriving, who he recently held up in Sherwood Forest and had been holding as a prisoner there, and that this abbot is arriving, and he's sure that the abbot is going to give him away, but then it turns out to be Friar Tuck arriving in the disguise of this abbot. And Lady Alice, who's been wanting to hear more about Robin, says, "Oh, we heard that you were waylaid by Robin Hood. You must have met him. Tell us all about him. Is he as handsome as they say?" And Friar Tuck, in this guise of the indignant abbot, is like, "Oh no,
he's like cast in both eyes. He's missing more teeth than he has.
As handsome as the back end of a horse."
Yes, just it was a great scene, and there was a lot of really great banter. Like I said, there was a lot of banter, and a lot of banter between Robin and Tuck. Like a lot of banter. And it didn't feel tired. It didn't feel droll. It didn't feel forced. It felt like these two men were friends.
Yeah.
And had been friends for 10 years,
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Next on the list is how robbed were the rich. On a scale of 1 to 10.
Are we counting gambling?
How do you,
yes.
It's specifically, how well did Robin serve as a champion of the people?
I mean, I'd put it pretty low. Unlike most Robin Hood movies, they're not doing the whole, we're taking from all the rich people. There was a little bit of it in there.
They robbed the priest Jude. They robbed the corrupt blacksmith. They robbed Guy Benton through gambling. I'm actually going to rate it fairly high. And we don't see him distributing it, I will say. And, so it's going to knock a point off for that. There is talk, this is a Robin that's been going on for 10 years. So it makes more sense that people talk about, oh, no, he's a friend to the little guy and everything, which they do specifically mention in a few points here, because they talk about, like, they're trying to get in contact with him. They talk about his bounty at the start. It's like 5,000 crowns, which is an insane amount of money at that point. but like, they talk about how nobody will sell him out in the city because he's a friend to people. So I would actually rate it pretty high. I'd put it at like an 8 or a 9. I might even put it higher, to a 10, but I would put it at an 8 to a 9.
I'm going right in the middle, leaning towards a 6, in that we get this idea that this is a Robin Hood who does this. We get that scene where he is robbing the abbot and specifically calling out the church for its avarice, for its greed, and indicating that this is wealth that is going to be distributed. It's not the crux of the plot. It's not where we see him. Why we see him battling our villains is on behalf of King Richard, not on behalf of we need to protect the poor people who are getting heavily taxed or anything like that. We don't see him offering succor to anybody who's been harmed or hurt. So I can't rank it very highly, but we got enough of a background. It's something they even say at the very beginning text is how they've been levying this toll against the wealthy members of society. So we do get that notion that they are robbing the rich and that they are distributing some wealth, but it's also not emphasized that it's their raison d'etre, that it's not their motivator. Yeah.
I'll grant you that. No, I'll go with an 8 because I do feel that they were very robbed. Again, we don't see them. Well, like we see them flat out robbing people.
We do,
and everything. And the question is, how robbed were the rich?
Yes,
the rich were very robbed.
I'm still waiting for the Robin Hood Bernie Sanders casting.
Yes, yeah, that's going to be in the next remake.
That would be a really interesting remake.
All right. Any low points we want to hit? We've been saying a lot of really positive things about the film. We did clearly enjoy it a lot. I'm afraid it's not going to make it onto your list of worst movies of all time, Jeff.
Definitely not. It's way better than a lot of movies I've seen recently.
But it's certainly not a perfect film. What were some of the low points?
Like I said, I did feel some of the choreography for the fights were clunky. There were definitely a lot of the extras who it was clear they were just hold sword like this, hold sword like this, hold sword like this.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the down points. I mean, overall, I feel that there were far fewer low points in this movie than some of the more recent ones that we've watched. Because it is a genuinely fun film, and there's nothing that spoils it. Like sometimes there'll be like a scene that's kind of off tone or something like that. And I can't really think of one. I do feel that the very end of the movie it could be just a smidge stronger. Like the denouement at the very end felt, I mean, it's literally like, I think it's something like 70 seconds. It's not very long.
The very short scene with King Richard in the forest where he's just like, oh, well, everything turned out well. I forgive all you for being outlaws. And
I forgive you for poaching too.
And hey, my knight dude who's actually engaged to the lady. How about you take that castle from the traders?
Yeah, he's the one who gets a castle, not Robin Hood.
Yeah, that was actually something I liked, is Robin didn't get the castle.
He's nobility.
Right.
And so we have the reinforcement of
and clearly one of the king's trusted knights.
Yeah, the climax felt kind of rushed. It wasn't bad. We have Richard and his Crusader knights trying to fend off this assassination attempt from the evil knights and their men, and they're kind of holding their own. When Robin Hood
Crusaders against guards.
Yeah, when Robin Hood and his men sort of ride up and Robin shoots some guys, they attack them, and then the head guard is just like, every man for yourself, and they just split. They flip. It wraps up really quickly. Robin basically arrives on the scene, and the bad guys are just like, oh, nope, Robin's here, we've lost.
For one thing, I actually do appreciate that. Richard and his companions are Crusaders. They're coming back. They're not schlubs. And yes, your average castle guard who spends all day just walking a wall, Yeah, not
Not
as
gonna
good
do
as the
so
guy
well.
who just spent a few years smacking around Saracen.
Yeah, and I thought that was well demonstrated by the fact that you had the king and 2 knights holding off an entire band of tower guards.
Tower guards who are not in armor.
Yeah.
Either. So like,
Yeah.
they're probably going to be a little bit more warrior of swords.
Yeah,
Because the guards were not in armor because they were disguised as
bandits.
bandits, because they were going to try to blame the assassination on Robin Hood, which
Um,
again was another the villains doing something clever kind of moment.
Yeah, and no, the villains had a solid plan, and it felt solid. And that part of the things I didn't mind. This is kind of the case of like, oh look, the guys with a few levels in fighter, they can hold off against the the guys,
the pile of level 0 guards.
The pile of level 0 guards. And then the PCs showed up, and you're like, oh crap. There is no confrontation between Guy of Benton and Robin.
Yeah,
well,
he just
Robin
runs away.
shoots him with an arrow.
Yeah, he just
That's it.
hits him with an arrow. Which, I mean, well, on one level, I applaud it for its pragmatism. Did feel like it missed a payoff.
I was okay with it. There wasn't a lot of like personal animosity and a lot of like really like scenes in between the two of them.
And the
Sir
guy's
motivation was to gank King Richard, and Robin's motivation was to save King Richard. And so I felt like on that level, the payoff was there. They didn't have any kind of personal stakes in which I kind of would have cared about a sword fight between the two of them.
And the guy was really he was not a direct confrontation villain.
No,
he was all about sneakiness and guile.
That was actually something else I liked. Also, he wasn't going to be present for the assassination of Richard. He was hiding elsewhere. He only showed up on the scene because the assassination attempt wasn't going as well as he hoped it would.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of one of these things of like, you're expecting a big confrontation and it doesn't happen. So it feels disappointing because you're expecting it, not because that part is bad. And
like if there had been just kind of more of a fight where it was like clear that Robin Hood was needed to save the day, I think would have been good. And that was why it felt a little bit rushed and underwhelming, but it was certainly serviceable. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
My primary low point was that idea of the dedication to Richard. There's a scene early in the movie where a count who is loyal to Richard is trying to intercept a message that will let him know when Richard's going to arrive in England. And he thinks that Robin Hood is the one who has this message. So he tricks Robin into abducting him, which I thought was pretty well done also.
Yep.
And then tries to get, when he finds out that Robin doesn't have the message, tries to say, well, but will you help me? Will you help me recover this message? Let's save our good King Richard. And Robin in that moment is like, they just sounded the horn that says dinner is ready.
Yeah.
But don't you love the king? It's like, sure, I love the king, but I also love dinner and it's time to eat. Like, he was being very pragmatic and I really enjoyed that. But then at the end of the movie, where they find out that they have been tricked and that the ambush is happening in a different place, and Lady Alice is ridden out to tell them this, and they say, oh, we have to change our plans. We need to go to this other place and save Richard. And somebody says, oh, but you only have 6 men and they have 20. You could be killed. And he says, oh, but we have to do it anyway. It's like, oh, where does this like sudden intense loyalty come from? Why is he actually willing to risk his life? This isn't a Robin who's a nobleman. This isn't a Robin who was in the Crusades with Richard. He has no personal relationship with Richard. Getting away from the whole like, Richard probably wasn't that great a guy in the first place anyway. Like that, this Robin would, especially at the end, be so ready to risk his life and those of his followers to save Richard. That part felt a little forced, a little bit like, oh, this is just the thing that we expect him to do.
It's one of those reasons I think that so often in the retelling of Robin Hood, he is a disenfranchised nobleman, is used, because otherwise, why do you care who's king? If you're just a peasant who lives in the woods, who's king doesn't change the fact of how good your life is.
Yeah.
I think for me, reading that situation, I agree with you. It did feel a little bit like a left turn on the character, or right turn, whichever way. I guess for me, it kind of made a little bit of sense, because I think at that point he had become invested in the cause. Because like at the start, he's not, like you said, he's like, yeah, that's nice that Richard's in danger and everything. I'm a bandit and I want dinner. But I think by the end of it, it's more he's invested in stopping the plot.
Yeah.
Because he realizes that if he doesn't, there's this sudden power shift.
It's true. He's put in a lot of work into it at that point.
It's a little bit of a sunk cost fallacy, but but I think it is. I think it is very much that, like, I'm going to see this through to the end because I said I would, and because I'm involved. And also, if I don't, this guy's probably do terrible things to people and everything, and he's not a nice guy. So I don't feel it was quite as much of a. Yes, it did feel like, okay, this motivation isn't well explained, but I didn't feel it was out of character.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, it's easy to ding the movies in general just for putting Richard forward all the time as such a good, noble king. He even has the line in this movie, my beloved England. Mm-hmm. As though Richard I actually cared at all about England.
Yeah, there was that, but at least nobody talked about how democratic he was.
This is true.
Or even how good a king he was. Like, nobody actually says that he's a great king. They're just like, he's the king, and we need to stop people from murdering him when he shows up.
That's
and
true.
his brother taking the throne.
And I actually would have liked it more if it was presented more along the lines of, like, it kind of doesn't matter if he's the king, we're going to go prevent somebody from being murdered.
I almost feel like that was more Robin's motivation than anybody, because like you said, this was a Robin who wasn't all about just killing people, and he was much more actually about kind of stopping people from dying, sort of a thing. There's this one guard who they knock out more than once, and you have to wonder how those concussions have affected him.
Yeah.
But it would have been much more expedient to just kind of shank the guy and dump his body someplace. But they don't. And Robin doesn't. And they don't kill people lightly. And so, like, the idea that Robin, regardless of any feelings he may or may not have about Richard as a king, just the thought that he's like, we're going to go prevent people from just murdering the king, because that's
just bad.
Yeah, that's just a bad thing, having people just run around murdering each other. That definitely feels in character for this particular Robin Hood.
I don't disagree with that. I think that is an astute and fair read on the character and situation. Yeah, so that was surprisingly few low points for a Hammer film from the 50s.
Surprisingly few low points, and none of them like terrible.
So any other high points or qualities you want to mention? Things that we haven't already covered. Jeff, do you have any?
No, I don't think so. We've covered all my favorite bits.
Yeah, I mean, I did also feel like this felt like a story that unfolded nicely. You're not dealing with Sir Guy of Benton at the start, actually. Like, you don't even see him anywhere.
Yeah.
So there's this unfolding thing where Robin finds out about something happening. He then goes and investigates.
Yeah, there was some genuine mystery and investigation, and it had a good... This was something I was going to mention at this point now for high points and qualities, is that they tie in the world. Like, heraldry ties into this investigation. Oh, I don't know who this knight was, but he describes his shield. And so then he goes to the armorer who he thinks might have made the shield. It is investigative in a very kind of real sort of way that also used the medieval setting.
Yeah, it felt, for lack of a better term, it felt like a well-written D&D module. I mean, it really did. Where, like, you're entreated by this other nobleman to find out about this thing, this artifact that's been stolen.
Yeah, there's a MacGuffin at the beginning, but then that doesn't hold sway throughout the film. I was kind of expecting that this Saracen figure puzzle toy that held a secret message was going to serve as the MacGuffin throughout the film, but then it didn't. But halfway through, that message has been solved and they've moved on to other things.
Yeah, well, and they're like, they find out that they kidnapped they basically kidnapped the two people who stole it, and they interrogate them, which call back to a previous I don't know if it was an intentional callback to a previous Robin Hood movies. One of them was named Dickon, which was who Much the Miller Son had to murder in a river. But they uncover this, they talk about, and they find out that they met this guy on a bridge, but he had this heraldry, and there's a really nice little bit of banter between, pretty sure it's Little John, Tuck, and Robin Hood, where they're discussing well, that's the heraldry of so and so, and he would never do this, but who would hide behind heraldry and everything? No blacksmith would make it, but which blacksmith would? And they all say together the name of the blacksmith.
Oh, Hugo the Armorer. Yes,
Hugo the Armorer,
that jerk, and everything. He's a mercenary son of a. And and they have to go there, and they have to investigate, and they get almost trapped by the sheriff, and they finally wheedle the information out of him and witness things. It feels, like I said, it feels like a proper investigatory plot, like you would have in a really nice RPG module. So
they have to make their stealth rolls.
They have to make their stealth rolls or their upper body strength rolls to climb up into a loft and everything. So yeah, I mean that's definitely one of the high points for me, is that there's this genuine mystery that you as the audience learn about along with the characters, which is the kind of the best kind of mystery. And you're finding out the clues, and as the characters come to conclusions, you come to conclusions, and everything. So, and I genuinely enjoyed that. It actually makes the first half of this movie really enjoyable. The second half is good, but that first half actually feels really, really enjoyable. That there's this movement in the investigation.
My only other point that I wanted to mention, I do feel like the mention of Dickon might have been an Easter egg, because there were a couple here and there. While the film is never trying to retell any of the ballads, it does lay in a few Easter eggs. Like you mentioned earlier, a knight mentions having met Robin before at the wedding of Alan a Dale. And so that is an Easter egg in reference to a ballad. There's mention at the beginning of the film that, we can't find Robin Hood. He's probably got 100 hideouts scattered between Sherwood Forest and Barnesdale. And you almost never hear Barnesdale mentioned, but Barnesdale is the forest that is mentioned in the very oldest existing Robin Hood ballads. He's got this early connection to Barnesdale, at least as strong as the connection to Sherwood. It's just kind of gotten dropped off in more recent popular imaginings, most of them at least.
They have Will Stutely as a non-speaking part. He shows up at one point.
Yeah, they're Much the Miller's Son, Will Stutely, like a couple other well-known merry men get name dropped. So there's a lot of really fun little Easter eggs in there for people who are kind of fans of Robin Hood and Robin Hood stories, without them just rehashing the stories that you've already seen before.
Yeah, whoever wrote this, okay, Alan McKinnon wrote this.
Whoever wrote this. This very specific guy, who tragically died very young. He was only 43.
Yeah, he was fairly young. Died only a few years after this movie came out.
Yeah.
Actually, I believe he died the next year. He died in 55. Yeah, so he died the next year.
Yeah, real shame, because I think he had a lot of, real shame for a number of reasons, not just because we didn't get more screenplays by him.
Yeah, but he obviously had a lot, some kind of familiarity with the source material, with the actual source material, not the movie source material. Because there's some of this is good callbacks to other movies, but some of it is definitely some callback to the actual, because like the wedding of Alan a Dale isn't in any but one of the movies that we've seen. Because it's at the very end of the Prince of Thieves.
Oh yeah, that's the strange
Alexander Dumas one.
Yeah, the Alexander Dumas where Alan Adale is Marion's brother, and yeah.
But like it's not mentioned in any of the other ones as far as that I can remember. And so like to have it in there, obviously the writer was familiar with the ballads on some level.
Ballads or some of the other novelizations that had existed by that point or something. Yeah. All right. Any last words for us, Jeff?
No, it was a surprisingly enjoyable movie considering my initial expectations. It was quite fun to watch.
My apologies. I will try to find a bad movie to watch with you some other time.
Yes, we'll have to screen out and find a really terrible
something
movie
I can actually rip into.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, I would say to anybody who has been following along with us and listening to this before watching the movies, if you're that bent, actually go and watch this one.
Yeah,
if you can find it.
Yeah.
I mean, so I did. I had a trouble finding this film at first, but did eventually find it on DVD. Did get a DVD release, and I found it from a online retailer that retails many things. Originally had primarily been books. If you can find it from another source first, I would suggest doing that.
Yeah, no, I would say definitely go and watch this one. Add it to your repertoire, and Mike needs to go watch this one.
Yeah, Mike Nichols,
you
especially getting called out to go watch this movie. If you haven't already. I'm specifically
calling you out to go watch this one and see if this might give us a grade rating on the Friar Tuck in this movie.
Yes. How do you feel about the strip poker playing Friar Tuck?
The strip poker playing, body song singing Friar Tuck. I want to know what I'm actually really curious what Mike thinks of this, because given that he is such a Friar Tuck fanboy. Who writes a play? Who writes their own Friar Tuck fan fiction and makes it into a play? It's so awesome.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us in the Greenwood and kind of finding the hidden gem from all these Robin Hood movies from the 40s and 50s that I kind of always hoped would be there.
This is so far the real hidden gem.
Yeah.
Right?
The Prince of Thieves film from 48 was very enjoyable. I liked it a lot. This one was really solid though.
This one was more fun. Like the only thing that would make I think that the Prince of Thieves movie brought us more genuine joy with was Maud.
Yeah, she was a great character.
This one was just a genuinely fun Robin Hood story and movie. And so, yeah, I would really encourage people to go and watch this one.
Yep.
Jeff, final thoughts?
Again, just a surprisingly good movie with lots of funny bits in it, and just not a story I expected to hear, because when you say we're going to watch a movie about Robin Hood, I expect your standard origin of Robin Hood, dealing with the sheriff, dealing with Prince John, Richard returns, and that's it.
Yeah.
And this was just a very different approach. It was really nice.
Yeah, it was good. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
I went into this project being well acquainted with the 1938 film starring Errol Flynn, and a few of the more modern Robin Hood movies as well. From that perspective, I had been expecting that the film industry had fully glommed onto the narrative that Robin Hood had been a nobleman before becoming an outlaw. My suspicions deepened when I watched the 1922 Douglas Fairbanks movie for the first time, in which our hero spends more of the film's runtime functioning as a knight in the service of King Richard than he does as an outlaw in Sherwood Forest. And so it's come as a bit of a surprise and a delight to have come across several films now from the 1940s and 1950s that have not relied on that narrative. 1952's Story of Robin Hood did see him being granted a title at the end, but in the beginning, he was the son of a simple yeoman. And while 1948's The Prince of Thieves and this film, Men of Sherwood Forest, have eschewed providing an origin story, we are presented with a Robin fully formed already, the leader of an outlawed band, and quite clearly not a member of the noble class. And while neither of those films attempted to retell the classic ballads, in some very substantive ways, they're the ones that feel the most like an extension of the medieval tradition of Robin Hood stories, as those early ballads don't dwell on Robin's origin either, and distinctly reference him as being a yeoman. Not exactly coming from the lowest rungs of society, but decidedly not of the ruling elite either. I'm curious now to see what the other films from the 50s and 60s will bring as we continue this cinematic journey through time. Although, for the next Splitting Arrows, we'll be dipping our toes back into the Child of Robin Hood subgenre, with 1958's Son of Robin Hood. I hope that you'll join us again for that one as well. In the meantime, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, all with the handle @IntoGreenwood. You can also email us directly via intogreenwood@gmail.com. Into the Greenwood is completely ad-free, and we're hoping to keep it that way. To do that, though, we do rely on your support. Contributions for as little as $1 per episode on patreon.com/intogreenwood go a long way towards keeping us on the air. Of course, backers will also get access to early episode releases, t-shirts, and other perks. And because we value both charity and conservation, 10% of all proceeds go to the selected top-rated foundation of Trees, Water, and People. Non-monetary contributions, such as positive ratings and reviews that help us get noticed in the Podfinder algorithms, and good old-fashioned word of mouth, goes a long way towards helping small, independent podcasts like this one. Into the Greenwood is produced and edited by me, Thaddeus Papke. Our theme music is by Plastic 3. Also, if you've never seen The Court Jester starring Danny Kaye, please do yourself a favor and give that film a watch. As always, thank you once again for joining us in the Greenwood.
Don Taylor was doing that also. He was doing a really good job of being able to convey this, like, I need to be dead serious when I have to, but also genuinely going to be laughing and having a joke with my friends. Yeah.
No, it's the Robin Hood should be like a mullet, party in the back, business up front.
Yeah, that's getting cut out.